Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the CDO Magazine interview series. My name is David Zhao. I'm Managing Director of Coda Strategy. Today, I have the pleasure of once again being joined by Kyle Pudenz, who is the Senior Vice President of Enterprise Analytics at Cencora. Kyle, as always, thanks for joining me again.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Now, when we first spoke about Cencora's top data priorities, you had stressed the importance of data strategy, data governance, and a data architecture to tie it all together and enable analytics to address business problems. So I wanted to double click on that data architecture piece. Now, Cencora is in the supply chain distribution business, and supply chain has a lot of integration challenges. So at Cencora, how do you design a data architecture to integrate with external parties? So that'll be manufacturers and their CDMOs. It'll be the 3PLs, and then pharmacy benefits managers, and of course, ultimately, the providers, the hospitals, retail pharmacies. And of course, throughout the supply chain, we have to keep the data secure. This is, in my mind, an enormous integration challenge. So if I were to start to think about it, how would I start thinking about the data architecture I need to address that?
Yeah, that's a really big question. So, fortunately for me, I have a lot of really excellent technology partners within the organization that have a lot of expertise specifically in this space. I can tell you from an analytics perspective, what's super important to me is that we have access to right data that we're being requested to use to solve very specific business challenges and problems. That requires, like you said, the right architecture that considers things like privacy, considers things like organizations' interest in keeping their data secure, right? So anything that they share with us, making sure that it has the appropriate level of visibility, even within our organization, so that they have confidence that what we are doing won't put them at risk, right? So I think architecture obviously is where a lot of this starts, and having the right architectural partners that you're bringing into that conversation, as well as having the internal expertise. And for us, that can bridge our legal team, our cyber risk team, our overall enterprise architecture team, and then the actual teams that are building those products, and understanding what are the appropriate uses of that data. What are the contractual data usage rights that we have that even go beyond the architecture? But having that as a top consideration as you go through that process is pretty critical, to make sure that what you deliver is truly usable, and also creates something that, while it creates value, doesn't unnecessarily put patient or companies' information at risk.
Now, I wanted to tie that data architecture back to business and organizational strategy. So we talked about external parties and data privacy and data sharing. Uh, in my mind, there's somewhat of a trade-off. So how would you decide, or how do you decide whether to share data on the one hand to drive operational efficiency throughout the supply chain, but then on the other hand, we could commercialize the data, charge a fee, because this data is very valuable, and earn revenue. So there's a greater good component to just let's just share everything and drive operational efficiency to, well, let's, you know, have some good for the company and earn revenue. How do we think about data in those terms of business and organizational strategy?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? Because within supply chain, there and where we sit within that end-to-end delivery of pharmaceuticals and also a lot of services, right? So beyond the core of our business, we have a lot of life science services, consulting, et cetera, that we provide. And there's always a question of the degree of transparency that is appropriate from a public health perspective. And a lot of times I think you see insights that we may derive come to light there, where we sit on a wealth of information that we can really synthesize and provide feedback to governmental organizations just to help drive policy or for them to understand what are some bigger challenges, what would be helpful for our market or other markets to just be more efficient. Um, but these solutions do not come without a cost, right? So, especially with an organization our size, sometimes that cost can be rather significant, especially if it comes down to something like tracking information on every single product that's moving through Cencora's distribution centers across the world. That takes a lot of investment on our side, and typically you would look for opportunities to create meaningful products for our partners, whether those are customers or upstream manufacturers. They can actually help them optimize their business. So usually that's going to be some type of value exchange, and that can show up in many different ways. I know a lot of times the focus is on the commercialization aspect. I would argue that there's a lot more in terms of value realization that may extend into operational savings, more efficiency, better decision making. They can actually impact both your top and bottom line.
And love that answer where it's really dependent on the external stakeholder, right? Like government, let's be transparent, err on the
Right.
side of sharing information. But for other other stakeholders where the cost is high to deliver this insight, there should be some consideration of revenue generating opportunities of providing that data transparency.
Revenue generating or cost savings opportunities, right? I mean, there it can be on both sides. So, like I said, that it's both a top and bottom line in the world of supply chain. Costs are significant, right? And margins are not as high as you might see in other businesses. So, I think it's important to consider both those commercializable opportunities where there are partners that would get significant value out of the synthesis of data that we can provide. But there's also a lot of cost savings opportunities for both us and for the broader supply chain.
Absolutely. Now, I want to close our conversation with a crystal ball. So, asking you now to look into the future. What do you see in the supply chain analytics space? Let's say 5 years out. Talk about time horizons, set the time horizon to 5 years into the future. And we've been talking about business strategy. So, how do you think Cencora can maintain competitive advantage through data analytics and maybe AI?
Yeah, I think that's probably top of mind for a lot of companies today, especially with the not so long ago emergence of generative AI, right? That really I think captured the imagination of the what if. How can we use this? Where would it go? And it's really I think put the quote to test, and that quote is, it's sometimes you overestimate what you can do in the next 1 to 2 years, but you typically underestimate what will change in the next 10. And I'm sure I've not quite got that exactly right, but the intention is nonetheless the same. So 5 years is a pretty interesting horizon, right? Because I think this is where you start to see those two start to come together. Um, I do think there's a lot that we can do with generative AI, just in terms of efficiency. Really, I think starting with the overall processes we have and reviewing those, and then applying Gen AI to the revised processes, to automate away things that maybe aren't so value added, for the human capital, the intellectual capital that we can add to it. And that really starts to free up team members to apply their knowledge, their understanding, of the supply chain to the broader healthcare industry, where they can really start to add value. And I'm super excited about what that holds. I also am excited about capabilities beyond generative AI when you get into the world of like knowledge graphs, and graph analytics, and how that moves us beyond our traditional SQL-based analytics, where now you really start to see context come into play, because most challenges are really going to be elevated by understanding that broader context. How are things related? How are they connected? How are they dependent on one another? And it's not just so direct and linear in terms of those relationships. So the ability to truly provide that context, and provide that context both at scale and in sometimes in near real-time capabilities, that starts to allow for some really amazing applications that should really elevate overall performance, and really helps you fully realize the value of your underlying data, and your understanding of that industry.
You mentioned a couple of emerging technologies, so generative AI, knowledge graphs. So, in your mind, is it better to have kind of a long-term 1 to 5 year roadmap to say, here's what we want to do in that time horizon with these emerging technologies, or just take a bottoms up test and learn approach, see what we can do, come up with some ideas, see if that works, iterate. So that top down long-term roadmap versus bottoms up test and learn, or maybe you would prefer some kind of hybrid approach. But should we think about incorporating emerging technologies into something that's as complex as pharmaceutical supply chain distribution?
I definitely advocate for that middle road, right? Where you have both in play, because I think right now we know what we know, and we can build a roadmap based on business problems that we have today, and how we can apply these capabilities to help us solve those problems, right? So having that 5 year plan so that you can make the right investments in the architecture, so you can prioritize the right data sets, so you can make sure even your contracts around what data can you use and how can you use it, that takes a while to get all of that in place. So having that long-term vision is always important. That said, you don't know what you don't know. And I think it's such a waste when you have talented team members, and we have a lot of talented data scientists that not only understand the technical ability, but they actually understand the industry, and they really seek out ways to apply that and say, hey, what if I tried this, or what about that? And when you start to marry those things together, you can come up with some really novel applications. So I think it's important to nurture that, because that really provides that innovation space, where you may develop something And the amount of investment is not necessarily significant for that to happen, right? Just allowing for some time for that to be nurtured and developed could potentially really pay back in the future.
I think we could speak all day about what the future holds and how we should be planning for it. But that's all the time we have today. So to wrap up this conversation, Kyle, I want to thank you once again for taking the time to share your knowledge and insights about data and the pharmaceutical supply chain.